All right, look, I need you to sit down for this one because what I'm about to tell you is going to mess with your head. Imagine this. You've got a trusted family doctor, someone you've known for years, someone who makes house calls, someone who actually takes time to listen to you instead of rushing you out after 5 minutes, someone with a waiting list a year long because everyone wants him as their GP. Now imagine that doctor is secretly murdering his patients. Not one or two, not a dozen, at least 215 people, possibly as many as 250, maybe even more. Over 23 years, Dr. Harold Shipman, this mild-mannered, bearded GP in Greater Manchester, was quietly killing about one patient every 10 days. He'd visit them at home, inject them with a lethal dose of diamorphine, watch them die, then sign the death certificate saying it was natural causes. And nobody caught him for over 2 decades. This isn't some Netflix drama. This actually happened. In Britain, in the 1970s, 80s, and 90s. A doctor, someone sworn to do no harm, became one of the most prolific serial killers in modern history. Hit subscribe right now, because this case is going to make you question every doctor's appointment you've ever had. Harold Frederick Shipman was born on January 14, 1946, in Nottingham, England. Working-class family, council estate. His dad was a lorry driver. His mom, Vera, was a homemaker. Devout Methodists. 3 kids. Harold was the middle child. And here's the thing everyone points to when trying to understand why he became what he became. Harold was a mama's boy, like really close to his mother. She doted on him, had high aspirations for him, pushed him academically. Harold was bright, genuinely smart. While his siblings were average students, Harold excelled, and his mother made sure everyone knew it. She wanted him to be special, to be more than just another working-class kid from Nottingham. Then, when Harold was 17 years old, his mother got lung cancer. He watched her deteriorate over months, watched her suffer. And here's the detail that everyone fixates on. He watched as the family doctor came to their home regularly to give her morphine injections to ease her pain. Vera Shipman died in 1963. Harold was devastated. And according to pretty much every psychological profile ever done on Shipman, that experience, watching his mother receive those pain-killing injections, watching her slip away peacefully, imprinted something on his brain. Because decades later, that's exactly how he'd kill his victims. A doctor, home visits, morphine injections, peaceful death. Whether that's actually what drove him, or whether it's just convenient pop psychology, we'll never really know. Because Shipman never talked, never explained, never confessed. Despite, or maybe because of, his mother's death, Harold decided to become a doctor. He got into Leeds School of Medicine and qualified in 1970. By all accounts, he was a competent medical student. Nothing spectacular, but solid. He did his house jobs at Pontefract General Infirmary, got his qualifications, and was ready to start his career. In 1974, he joined a group practice in Todmorden, West Yorkshire. Small market town, tight-knit community. Perfect place for a young GP to build a practice. He married a woman named Primrose in 1966. They had 4 children together. From the outside, everything looked normal, respectable, the kind of life his mother would have been proud of. But in 1975, just a year after starting at Todmorden, everything nearly fell apart. His partners noticed something odd. Shipman was prescribing massive amounts of pethidine, a powerful painkiller, an opioid. Way more than seemed reasonable. They started investigating and discovered Shipman was forging prescriptions, writing scripts for patients who didn't need them, picking up the drugs from the pharmacy himself, and using them. Harold Shipman was a drug addict. When confronted, he admitted to forging prescriptions for pethidine. He pleaded guilty to 8 offenses and asked for 74 more to be taken into account. 74. By that point, he'd illegally obtained about 70,000 milligrams of pethidine. He was fined, had to pay compensation to the NHS, was sent to a drug rehabilitation clinic, and everyone thought, okay, he had a problem, he got help, he's recovered. The General Medical Council gave him a warning and allowed him to return to work with no restrictions on prescribing. Let me repeat that. No restrictions on prescribing. A doctor caught forging prescriptions for opioids was allowed back to work with full prescribing privileges. And here's the truly terrifying thing. During this period in Todmorden, between 1974 and 1975, investigators later found evidence suggesting Shipman had already started killing patients. After his conviction for prescription fraud, Shipman couldn't stay in Todmorden. So in 1977, he moved to Hyde, Greater Manchester. Hyde was a working-class town, part of Greater Manchester, with a large elderly population. Perfect for a family GP. Shipman initially joined a practice called Donnybrook Medical Center. He worked there for 15 years, and during that time, he started building a reputation. Patients loved him. Seriously, there was a year-long waiting list to get onto his patient list. People specifically requested him. Why? He made house calls. In an era when most doctors were moving away from home visits, Shipman would actually come to you. He'd spend time talking to you. He'd listen. He seemed to genuinely care. Elderly patients especially adored him. He'd chat with them, joke with them, make them feel valued instead of like a burden on the healthcare system. I genuinely thought he was a great doctor. Very intelligent, one patient later said. I went to see him with different things, and he always had time to talk. You would expect to be kept waiting. But you accepted it because you knew he would spend time with you. In 1992, Shipman left the group practice and set up his own solo practice. Just him. No partners. No one looking over his shoulder. And that's when the killing really accelerated. Quick pause. If you're finding this as disturbing as I am, hit that subscribe button. Because it gets so much worse. Here's how Shipman killed his patients and why it took so long to catch him. Step 1. Choose the victim. Usually elderly. Usually women, 171 of his 215 confirmed victims were female. Usually living alone or with minimal family contact. Usually relatively healthy for their age, which should have been a red flag, but wasn't. Step 2. The house call Shipman would arrange to visit them at home, usually in the afternoon between 1 and 6 p.m. Sometimes he'd say it was for a blood test. Sometimes a routine checkup. Sometimes he'd just drop by. The key was, he was alone with them in their home. Step 3. The injection. Shipman would inject them with a massive dose of diamorphine, medical-grade heroin, a powerful opioid painkiller used in palliative care. The dose was lethal. They'd die within minutes, peacefully. They'd just slip away. Step 4. The cover-up Shipman would discover the body. He'd call family members or neighbors. "I'm so sorry," he'd say. "It seems she's had a heart attack. She's gone peacefully." Because he was a doctor, he could legally sign the death certificate. He'd write old age, or coronary thrombosis, or stroke as the cause of death. Nobody questioned a doctor's assessment. Step 5. The disposal. Here's the genius, and I hate using that word, but the evil genius of Shipman's method. He'd often encourage families to cremate their loved ones. "It's what she would have wanted," he'd say, "much more dignified than burial." Cremation destroys physical evidence. No body means no exhumation. No exhumation means no toxicology. No toxicology means no murder investigation. Step 6. Falsifying records. The truly chilling part? Shipman would go back to his office and alter the patient's medical records. He'd type in notes about chest pains, breathing problems, heart conditions, symptoms they'd never actually reported. So if anyone ever looked at the records, it would appear the patient had been in declining health. The death would look completely natural. What Shipman didn't realize, or didn't care about, was that the computer system timestamp tagged every entry, so investigators could later prove he'd altered records after the patients died. But for years, nobody looked. Why would they? He was a trusted doctor. People die, especially elderly people. That's just life. Except it wasn't life. It was murder. About once every 10 days. For over 20 years. Here's what should have raised alarm bells way earlier. Abnormal death rates. In 2000, a statistician named David Spiegelhalter analyzed Shipman's practice. The death rate among Shipman's patients was massively higher than comparable practices. Between 1992 and 1998 alone, just 6 years, he killed at least 143 people. That's almost 2 people per month. Time of death clustering. Most people die in the early morning hours. That's when the body is naturally weakest. Shipman's patients? They almost always died in the afternoon, between 1 p.m. and 6 p.m., when Shipman was making house calls. In fact, 12% of deaths in Shipman's practice occurred around 2 p.m., when he usually did home visits, compared to just 2% in similar practices. Rapid deaths. The proportion of Shipman's patients who died less than 30 minutes after his arrival was nearly 3 times that of similar practices. Think about that. You're an elderly person. You're feeling fine. The doctor shows up for a routine visit, and half an hour later, you're dead. That's not natural. That's suspicious as hell. Gender imbalance. About 80% of Shipman's victims were women. Now, women do live longer than men, so there are more elderly women. But the disparity was still notable. Witnesses. In many cases, Shipman was the only person present when the patient died. Again, this alone isn't suspicious. People do die alone. But combined with everything else? Major red flag. So why did nobody notice? Because Shipman was a doctor. And we trust doctors. Implicitly, completely, without question. And that trust is what allowed him to kill for more than 2 decades. In March 1998, another GP in Hyde, Dr. Linda Reynolds, started feeling uncomfortable. She'd been asked to countersign cremation certificates for several of Shipman's patients. In Britain, 2 doctors have to sign off on a cremation. It's a safeguard against exactly this kind of thing. And Dr. Reynolds noticed a pattern. A lot of elderly women from Shipman's practice were dying suddenly and being cremated quickly. She raised her concerns with the local coroner, John Pollard. The coroner contacted the police. In April 1998, the police launched an investigation. They interviewed Shipman. They looked at some records. And they found nothing. Why? Because Shipman had already altered the medical records. Everything looked legitimate. The patients appeared to have been in declining health. Their deaths seemed natural. The police closed the investigation in April 1998. No evidence of criminal activity. Dr. Reynolds was upset, but figured maybe she'd been imagining patterns that weren't there. Maybe it was just coincidence. It wasn't coincidence. And within weeks, Shipman would make a mistake so stupid, so arrogant, that it would finally bring his killing spree to an end. Kathleen Grundy was 81 years old, former mayoress of Hyde, active in local charities, sharp as a tack, healthy, energetic. the kind of 81-year-old who puts most 50-year-olds to shame. On June 23, 1998, she went to Shipman's surgery to have her ears syringed. Standard procedure. Shipman told her he was doing some research and needed blood samples from elderly patients. Would she mind if he came by her house the next morning to take a sample? Sure, she said. No problem. The next morning, June 24, 1998, Kathleen failed to show up at a local charity, where she normally helped serve lunches. Her friends were worried. They went to her house. The door was unlocked. Kathleen was on the sofa, fully clothed, curled up as if sleeping. But she wasn't sleeping. She was dead. Shipman was called. He examined her briefly and declared, "Cardiac arrest." He called the coroner's office and said he'd write the death certificate, listing old age as the cause. Case closed. Sad, but not suspicious. An 81-year-old woman died of old age. Happens every day. Except, a few days later, Kathleen's daughter, Angela Woodruff, a solicitor, received a letter from a local law firm. They had a will, Kathleen's will, dated just weeks before her death. Angela was confused. She'd always handled her mother's affairs. She'd never heard about a new will. She read it, and her blood ran cold. The will left Kathleen's entire estate, $386,000, about $500,000 USD, to Dr. Harold Shipman. Not to her daughter, not to charity, to her doctor. The will explained, "I give all my estate, money and house, to my doctor. My family are not in need, and I want to reward him for all the care he has given me and the people of Hyde." Angela knew immediately something was wrong. Her mother would never write something like that. The language wasn't right. The signature looked forged. She went to the police, and this time, they listened. The police obtained a court order to exhume Kathleen Grundy's body. Toxicology tests found lethal levels of morphine in her system. Morphine that had been administered shortly before death. They examined the will more closely. It was typed on a manual typewriter, a Brother typewriter, to be specific, with multiple obvious errors that had been corrected with Tip-X correction fluid. The signatures were clearly forged. Witnesses named in the will said they'd never signed anything. Police searched Shipman's home, and guess what they found? A Brother typewriter, the exact model used to type the will. Shipman was arrested on September 7, 1998, and then the police started looking at other deaths Shipman had certified. They identified 15 specimen cases to investigate in detail. They exhumed bodies. They ran toxicology tests. Every single one had died of morphine overdose. They examined Shipman's prescribing records. He'd been prescribing massive amounts of diamorphine, far more than his patient load could justify. He was picking up the prescriptions himself from pharmacies, just like he'd done with pethidine back in the 70s. They examined his computer records. The timestamps showed he'd altered patient records after their deaths, backdating symptoms to make the deaths appear natural. They interviewed families, and a pattern emerged. Shipman would visit. The patient would die within minutes. Shipman would declare it natural causes. He'd encourage cremation. And then he'd alter the medical records, over and over and over again. The police ultimately charged Shipman with 15 counts of murder and 1 count of forgery. But everyone knew there were far more victims. All right, subscribe right now if you haven't already, because we're about to get into the trial, and it's going to make you so angry. The trial began on October 11, 1999, at Preston Crown Court. It lasted 57 days. Shipman was charged with murdering 15 women. Marie West, 81, Irene Turner, 67, Lizzie Adams, 77, John Lilly, 59, Ivy Lomas, 63, Muriel Grimshaw, 76, Marie Quinn, 67, Kathleen Wagstaff, 81, Bianca Pomfret, 49, Nora Nuttall, 65, Pamela Hillier, 68, Maureen Ward, 57, Winifred Meller, 73, Joan Melia, 73, Kathleen Grundy, 81, the prosecution presented damning evidence. Toxicology showing lethal morphine doses. Shipman's prescribing records. Computer timestamps proving he'd altered medical records. The forged will. The typewriter in his home. Statistical analysis showing his abnormal death rates. Witness testimony about his behavior. Shipman's defense? He denied everything. He claimed he was being framed. He suggested someone else must have killed these women. He couldn't explain the morphine. He couldn't explain the altered records. He couldn't explain the forged will. He was arrogant. Dismissive. When police tried to show him photos of his victims, he sat with his eyes closed, yawning, refusing to look. On January 31st, 2000, after deliberating for just over 6 days, the jury returned their verdict. Guilty on all 15 counts of murder. Guilty of forgery. The judge, Mr. Justice Forbes, sentenced him to 15 consecutive life sentences plus 4 years for forgery. But then he did something rare. He imposed a whole life order. This meant Shipman would never be released. No parole. No possibility of freedom. He would die in prison. The judge told him, "Your crimes are so heinous that in your case, life must mean life." After the conviction, the British government commissioned a full public inquiry led by High Court Judge Dame Janet Smith. The inquiry's mission: figure out exactly how many people Harold Shipman killed and how he got away with it for so long. The inquiry examined 888 death cases connected to Shipman's practice. Their findings, published in a 6-volume, 2,000-page report called Death Disguised, were absolutely horrifying. Confirmed murders: 215 patients, suspected murders. 45 additional patients, inconclusive. 38 cases. That's 260 possible victims minimum. Some estimates go as high as 284 if you include deaths early in his career. 215 confirmed murders makes Harold Shipman one of the most prolific serial killers in history. The breakdown: 171 women, 44 men, ages ranged from 41 to 93. Most were killed in their own homes. Deaths spiked dramatically after 1992 when he opened his solo practice. He killed 7 people in February 1998 alone. 1 week, 7 murders. The inquiry also revealed when Shipman likely started killing, as early as 1971, possibly even during his time as a medical student. Here's the question that haunts everyone. Why did he do it? Shipman never confessed, never explained, never showed remorse. So we're left with theories. Theory 1. Power and control. Some psychologists believe Shipman got a godlike thrill from having power over life and death. As a doctor, he could decide who lived and who died, and that power was addictive. Theory 2. Mercy killing gone wrong. Some suggested he believed he was practicing euthanasia, relieving suffering, helping people die peacefully before they became a burden. But this doesn't hold up. Most of his victims weren't terminally ill. They weren't suffering. They were healthy elderly people with years left to live. Theory 3. Mother issues. The pop psychology angle. He was recreating his mother's death, giving patients the peaceful, morphine-eased death he'd watched his mother receive. But would someone kill 250 people because of unresolved grief? It seems too simple. Theory 4. He was just evil. Maybe there's no deep psychological explanation. Maybe Harold Shipman was simply a psychopath who enjoyed killing and found a perfect method to do it without getting caught. Theory 5. He wanted to get caught. The forged will was so clumsy, so obviously fake. Dame Janet Smith suggested that perhaps, subconsciously, Shipman wanted to be stopped. After 23 years of killing, maybe part of him wanted it to end. We'll never know the truth. Because on January 13, 2004, Shipman ensured we'd never get answers. Shipman was serving his sentence at HM Prison Wakefield in West Yorkshire. By all accounts, he'd settled in relatively well. He wasn't on suicide watch. He seemed stable. On the night of January 12, 2004, prison officers checked on him regularly through the night. At 5 a.m., he was alive and fine. At 6 a.m., they checked again. Shipman had hanged himself using bedsheets attached to the bars of his cell window. He'd positioned himself behind the curtain so guards couldn't see him during the regular checks. He was 1 day away from his 58th birthday. Why did he do it? According to his probation officer, Shipman had mentioned that if he died before age 60, his wife Primrose would receive his full NHS pension and lump sum. If he lived past 60, she'd get nothing because of his criminal conviction. So maybe it was a final act of providing for his family. Or maybe he couldn't face spending the rest of his life in prison. Or maybe he wanted to rob his victims' families of ever getting a confession, an explanation, closure. When the news broke, reactions were mixed. Some victims' families felt cheated. They'd never get answers now. Never know why their loved ones were murdered. Home Secretary David Blunkett later admitted, "You wake up and receive a call telling you Shipman has topped himself, and you think, is it too early to open a bottle?" The Daily Mirror called him a cold coward. The Sun ran the headline, "Ship, Ship, Hooray." Mrs. Jane Gaskill, whose mother was one of Shipman's victims, said, "He has won again. He has taken the easy way out." And she was right. Shipman got to die on his own terms, while his victims never had that choice. The Shipman case forced Britain to completely overhaul how the medical profession is regulated and monitored. Dame Janet Smith's inquiry made sweeping recommendations. Death certification reform. Before Shipman, a single doctor could sign a death certificate with minimal oversight. Now there are multiple layers of scrutiny and audit trails. Controlled drug monitoring. Doctors' prescribing of controlled substances is now much more closely monitored. The kind of overprescribing Shipman did would be flagged immediately today. Cremation procedures. The process for authorizing cremations became more rigorous with more independent oversight. Medical revalidation. The General Medical Council introduced mandatory revalidation. Doctors must now regularly prove they're still fit to practice. It's no longer a license for life. Whistleblowing protection. After Dr. Linda Reynolds raised concerns in 1998 and was essentially ignored, new protections were put in place for healthcare workers who report suspicious patterns. Solo practice concerns. There's now much more awareness of the risks posed by isolated doctors with no colleagues overseeing their work. Statistical monitoring. Death rates and patterns among GP practices are now monitored statistically, exactly the kind of analysis that would have caught Shipman years earlier. But here's the uncomfortable truth. These changes came too late for Shipman's victims. And there's an even more uncomfortable question. Could it happen again? Harold Shipman isn't unique. He's just the most prolific. According to Professor Beatrice Yorker, an expert who tracks healthcare serial killers, there's a database of over 150 healthcare providers worldwide who've been prosecuted for murdering their patients. Why are healthcare serial killers so common? Access to victims. They work with vulnerable people, sick, elderly, dependent. Access to means. They can legally obtain lethal drugs. Access to disposal. They can certify deaths and influence whether bodies are examined. Trust. We trust healthcare professionals implicitly. We don't question them. Isolation. Many work alone or in situations where their actions aren't closely observed. It's too easy, Yorker says. A healthcare serial killer can knock off 5 patients in a day. Other notorious healthcare serial killers include Beverly Allett, UK nurse, 4 murders, 3 attempted. Lucy Letby, UK nurse, 7 murders of infants, convicted 2023. Charles Cullen, US nurse, confessed to 2940 murders. Janine Jones, US nurse, up to 60 infant deaths. Kristen Gilbert, US nurse, 4 confirmed murders. And those are just the ones who got caught. Professor Yorker believes the number of healthcare serial killings that happen in homes is vastly undetected. So yeah, sleep tight. One more time, hit that subscribe button. Because we need to talk about what Shipman's case really means. It's easy to focus on the numbers. 215 confirmed murders, possibly 260 plus, but each of those numbers was a person, with a family, with people who loved them. And Shipman didn't just kill his victims, he destroyed their families too. Imagine finding out your mother didn't die of natural causes, that the kind doctor who comforted you, who told you she passed peacefully, who signed the death certificate, murdered her. Imagine realizing you thanked him, maybe even invited him to the funeral. Imagine the guilt. Should I have noticed something? Should I have questioned it? Many families had already cremated their loved ones on Shipman's recommendation. They'd never be able to prove what happened to them. They'd never get their bodies back for a proper burial. Some families refused to believe it at first. Their loved ones weren't included in the official victim count. Shipman hadn't been charged with those murders. But the statistical evidence strongly suggested they'd been killed too. Without a conviction for those cases, the families got no official acknowledgement, no closure, just a very strong suspicion that their relative was murdered, and no way to prove it. And then there's Shipman's own family. His wife Primrose stood by him. Throughout the trial, throughout his imprisonment, she maintained he was innocent. Their 4 children remained loyal. After his suicide, Primrose did receive his NHS pension, which is what Shipman reportedly intended. Can you imagine being Shipman's child? Your father is one of history's most prolific serial killers. That's your legacy. That's what you carry for the rest of your life. Here's what keeps me up at night about the Shipman case. If Harold Shipman, a mild-mannered GP in a small town, could kill 250-plus people over 23 years without anyone noticing, how many other Harold Shipmans are out there right now? How many deaths certified as natural causes are actually murders? How many doctors, nurses, care home workers are quietly killing patients and nobody's checking? The honest answer? We don't know. Statistical analysis can catch outliers, doctors with abnormally high death rates, but only if someone's looking. And in many places, nobody's looking. Shipman got away with it because he chose vulnerable victims, elderly, often alone. He had legitimate access to lethal drugs. He could certify deaths himself. He worked alone with minimal oversight. He falsified records. Everyone trusted him. How many of those conditions still exist in healthcare today? Even with all the reforms, most doctors still work with some degree of autonomy. They still have access to controlled drugs. They're still trusted implicitly. And statistically, there are almost certainly other healthcare serial killers operating right now who haven't been caught yet. That's not paranoia. That's just math. So what do we do with Harold Shipman's story? On January 31, 2000, when he was convicted, the British Medical Journal said, "Few doctors have had as great an impact on British medicine as Harold Shipman." That's a hell of a statement, but it's true. Shipman didn't just murder 250-plus people. He shattered trust in the medical profession. He forced a complete rethinking of how doctors are monitored and regulated. He changed death certification procedures. He made healthcare serial killer, a term everyone now knows. He was called Dr. Death, the angel of death. The good doctor, though that last one was dripping with irony. But here's what he really was: a psychopath who exploited the most sacred trust in society, the trust between doctor and patient, to satisfy whatever dark compulsion drove him. And he did it for 23 years. Killed at least 215 people, possibly 260, maybe more. We'll never know the true number. He got caught because he got greedy and forged a will so clumsily that even he must have known it would be discovered. Maybe he wanted to be caught. Maybe he just thought he was invincible after 23 years of getting away with murder. He died on his own terms, one day before his 58th birthday, robbing his victims' families of any chance of understanding why. The victims were real people: Kathleen Grundy, former mayoress, charity volunteer; Marie West, 81 years old; John Lilly, only 59; Bianca Pomfret, just 49, one of his youngest victims. They trusted him. They welcomed him into their homes. They thought he was there to help, and he killed them. One of Britain's top forensic pathologists later said about Shipman's case, "This was a doctor who became a mass murderer hiding in plain sight." That's the scariest part. He wasn't some monster lurking in the shadows. He was your friendly neighborhood GP. He was the doctor with the year-long waiting list because he was so caring and attentive. He was the last person anyone suspected. So here's my final question for you, the one I really need you to think about. What does it say about us, about our society, about human nature, that someone could do this for over 2 decades and nobody noticed? What does it say that we trust so completely? We don't question, we don't verify, we just believe? And what does it say that Shipman isn't unique? That there are dozens of healthcare serial killers in history, and probably more operating right now? I don't have good answers to these questions. I don't think anyone does. But I do know this: the Harold Shipman case isn't just about one evil man. It's about systemic failures. It's about blind trust. It's about how easily we can be fooled by someone in a position of authority. And it's about the terrifying reality that sometimes the person sworn to save your life is the person who's planning to end it. Shipman's victims can't speak for themselves. They can't warn us. They can't tell their stories. So we have to tell it for them. We have to remember. We have to learn. We have to make sure that the reforms that came from their deaths actually prevent this from happening again. Because if we don't, if we just move on, if we forget, then Shipman wins, and 250+ people died for nothing. Subscribe if you made it this far. Share this. Talk about it. Because the scariest monsters aren't the ones in horror movies. They're the ones wearing white coats, making house calls, and earning your trust.